Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been talking a lot in this House about environmental issues like climate change and water, but one of the other big environmental crises facing us globally, as well as in our province, is the loss of biodiversity. We are in the midst of what scientists describe as the 6th mass extinction event in our planet's history. Species are disappearing at a rate comparable to when the dinosaurs went extinct. Question to the Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action. What impacts does the loss of species pose for our province?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Well, I guess that all depends. We heard yesterday from an exchange between a couple of members here about the DFO restrictions on mackerel and herring, so we're seeing firsthand what is happening underwater. Above sea, we will see it with other both land mammals and other animals that are above ground here. So I think that it could be a great problem for us as far as feeding the world or feeding our population and growing our crops here. So yeah, the loss of biodiversity is very important, and it's something I think you'll see that jurisdictions all over the world are working to try to solve. And it's some of the things that we're tackling to try to get back in the right line. But you know, just like some of the other problems that we have with our carbon emissions, we're pretty far down the road, and the switch is going to have to be hard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown Belvedere.
A recent report from the East Coast Environmental Law points out that protections for endangered species in our province are non-existent. The Wildlife Conservation Act does give the Minister of Environment powers they can use to protect and recover species at risk, but over the 23 years that this legislation has been in place, Mr. Speaker, no minister has ever used it. Our province has never designated any species as endangered. Question to the same minister: why have you taken no action to protect endangered species in our province?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I don't necessarily think that's fair, and I don't think it's necessarily fair to look at some of the body of work that's done even before me. But some of the relationships that we have now with Island Nature Trust, where we're protecting sensitive areas so that they can no longer be developed. The things that are under NAPA protection in this province, the land that the Department of Environment is currently buying and has bought a number of parcels just this year to protect those sensitive areas so that they don't go away, so there is habitat there, so that we do have the opportunity to save species and protect them into the future. So just because some group in Halifax says that we're not doing a good job doesn't mean, because we don't invoke a piece of legislation and demand people do something, doesn't mean that there's people that aren't already working hard, both volunteer groups and people that are employed to do it inside of our department and inside the federal government, that they're not doing their job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown Belvedere.
If there's that much work going on, Mr. Speaker, it'd be great if the minister could actually table those plans to show that there is something happening. The Wildlife Conservation Act, which is the legislation, allows the minister to establish an advisory committee to give them expert advice on which species need protection and what needs to be done to protect them. And that committee, Mr. Speaker, doesn't exist. Question to the same minister: why haven't you established this advisory committee? Aren't you interested in listening to advice from experts?
Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly am, and I have a department full of them that are experts in wildlife, that are experts in forestry, that are experts in protection, that work every day, that care about the environment, that care about the species that are at risk, that care about protecting spaces so that we don't involve more species and put them in a position where they're further at risk. Quite frankly, I am listening to the experts, and you know, the honourable member likes to try to pick at small things and say that I'm not doing them because I won't bring forward a piece of legislation because we haven't had a chance, because I've only been in the chair for a year and have had a net zero plan. I'm working on a climate adaptation strategy. Like, to say that we're not doing nothing is completely preposterous. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
It's tough being minister, Mr. Speaker. East Coast Environmental Law's report calls on this minister without delay use his powers and the staff that he has available to him in his department to establish an advisory committee to designate species at risk, to put in protections for those species and their habitats, and to facilitate meaningful public participation in the process. Question to the minister: how about you do some of that?
Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
I'm not sure if you're asking me to do it or you're trying to be cheeky, but what I will go back to doing is relying on my department and the experts that are in them. I'll talk to them and I'll listen to what they want to do, and we'll bring forward the pieces of legislation, the policy changes that are needed, or any groups or advisory boards that are needed based on the advice of the experts in my department. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.